lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan, and with me today I have legendary artist Steve Rude to talk with me. We're going to talk some comics and past stuff, what he's got going on now with his current Kickstarter. Welcome to the show, man. I'm so happy to have you on.
Yeah, well, thank you, Ryan.
My pleasure. I always like to ask everybody the first time. I know that we've done a written interview in the past, but every time I have them on for the first time on the YouTube channel, I always like to hear, your experience getting into comics, like as a fan. How did that start?
Well, it starts, let me think about this. I never try to give pat answers to anything. It starts when you're a kid. For most people that get into comics, in my case, it was the 60s, and that was when Marvel was booming. They were just starting to get a grip on the comics marketplace, and they were up against the DC thing that was apparently what was selling at the time. And Marvel came along and introduced all these things and there's been changes in various things in culture. They'll say that, like, for example, when I had an older girlfriend that saw Jimi Hendrix one time, and I said, well, what's the big deal about Jimi Hendrix? The answer was always, and this applies to all these, comparing it to, they always said, we've never seen anything like that before. Mm-hmm. So that's how I try to relate what it felt like growing up in 1960s Marvels. That's when things were starting to change. And of course, I didn't have anything to compare them to, because I didn't read comics until my friends started buying them, and I would go over to their homes and start looking at them, and I was captivated by them immediately. I mean, I can't imagine a kid that would not look at a Spider-Man issue or a Jack Kirby comic, any comic by Jack Kirby, and not be just fixated by it. So that's how it all started. And then you combine that with somebody who has a flair for drawing, an aptitude for drawing, and it just kind of goes forward from there.
And then, so, I mean, you talk about like Marvel and stuff. So were there any specific, books that stood out to you from that time, from your early collecting days, and or like which creators would you say were maybe the most influential in developing, your style and kind of the direction you wanted to take your art?
Spider-Man's and anything by Jack Kirby. If you try to compare what DC was doing, DC was doing what we considered kid stuff, Giant Turtle, Jimmy Olsen, things like that. It was kid stuff. It was a lot of fun to read. But it was fluff. When you read something from Marvel, it seemed like literature. And ironically, I've been reading all these books on Stan Lee now that he's died. He's passed on. And I can't help but think that the years of toil that Stan was going through during that time in that very small bullpen area, if they weren't the best years of his life, because as soon as he stopped doing those books, writing those books and editing those books, plotting, tried to make an imprint in Hollywood, everything just kind of descended from there. Every time he tried to get through to the people in Hollywood, the more unhappy he became. And he became prey to a lot of ne'er-do-wells that took advantage of him. It's almost like he kept getting closer to the sun, and his wings just kept melting every time he got close. And it was very tragic. I'm sure you've read the books too on Stan, Ryan. They're all good books to read, because if you don't want to make the mistakes that other people have made, read their bios, and then you won't make them.
So, I kind of want to ask real quick. So some of this, like, what were some of the things that you learned about Stan that kind of did it change your outlook or your opinion of him at all? Because I know that for me, like, I grew up, like, to me, Stan Lee was the face of comics, like as a kid growing, like that's who I associated the most with comics when I first got into them. So I know that it has made me look at him a lot differently, not necessarily in a negative way, but like I look at him differently because there's a lot of things that I just didn't know myself about him.
No, it didn't change the way I looked at Stan at all. Stan was basically a just a really decent man. He had his personal flaws. He overlooked a lot of things. He was kind of a credit hog, and you
Hmm.
can't blame somebody for wanting to do that. But he had kind of a blind spot when it came to things like that. I would have personally, if I had been Stanley, I would have handled things a lot differently. As far as here's Jack Kirby, he
Hmm.
did all this, and it was Stan was really big on praising him. He always trumpeted Kirby's genius at every turn. I used to do more than just trumpet his genius and paid him for everything he did that he should have gotten paid for and wasn't. All those Marvel cartoons that Grant Trey Lawrence did in the '60s, nothing. All the T-shirts, all the ads, um, all the whatnots that Kirby's art was used for. Nowadays, I think people would insist on being compensated for things like that. At the time, the business being what it was, and things like original art being thought of as just disposable paper you toss once it got printed. Um, mindsets are very different during different generations. But as far as Stan goes, I met him several times, and I just thought he was wonderful. Everything that every time I saw him, he was. I think I saw him one time doing something that I thought was absolutely exceptional. This was in San Diego, and it was probably in the '90s. And I was walking back to my hotel, Ryan, and there was Stan standing out there in the lobby. I believe it was just something he did on his own. I hope it wasn't something that his handlers had kind of coerced him into doing, but he was just standing there in the lobby greeting every single person that came in, especially the kids.
Wow.
You can't get more wonderful than that. So the good side of Stan was that he built the empire that was Marvel. He was a huckster, he was a showman, and we never had somebody like that in the business. It was Stan that made that come true. That was just part of his personality, and we all benefited from that. Also, looking back and all these years, we've had to look into kind of the heyday of these cards. When Jack Kirby was doing his greatest work in the mid 1960s, I kind of focus it at the focal point with me is like 1966.
Okay.
That's when Stan was doing his greatest dialogue. I mean, it was just profound. To me, it was Shakespearean. If you look at some of the issues that I'm often big at pointing out, the dialogue is absolutely it's literature to me, and I often go back and look at all because it spans generations, and that's what great work is. It's timeless. It doesn't adhere itself to, oh, that's dated. No, it's nothing like that. This stuff is ageless, and
Mhm.
that's what I think of when I think of Stan working so hard and had to develop that so-called Marvel way of so to curve the lion's share for sure. But Stan was right there to make it to plus it in every way that you could imagine.
Yeah, I definitely think the comic book industry would be a lot different without if Stan had never come into it. So I'm super grateful for everything that he contributed and added into this industry that I love so much. So let's talk about. So I'll jump in. Jump a little ahead. You're probably best known for one of your creations, which is Nexus, right? I was wondering if you could give a little bit, and I know you've been putting out some, Nexus ash cans like through the Kickstarters, like the Battle of Thune World has been coming out. But can you talk a little bit about the history of the character, like how you came up with that with your co-creator Mike Barron, and then in turn maybe talk a little bit about the current stuff that you're working on with the character?
I kind of look at life as this long lineage of of progress. You're kind of you're someone that you're 18 and you're faced with, what am I going to do now? Every kid that during my generation had to look at that stark reality and say, what am I going to do now? At the time, I was I had rediscovered comics in high school, and that was a great time for me to. I was very lonely in high school. I thought, geez, I want to. Are comic books still being made? This, which is silly because it only been like 2 years since I last saw them when I was when I was a little bit younger. So I rediscovered them, and I discovered that Jack Kirby was still doing comics, which is fantastic. So, but there were other things going on at the time too, because different generations were entering the field, and like you said, the field that you love so much. Um, that's one of the remarkable things about comics that I don't think anyone gets into this field if they don't like it.
Mm-hmm.
They really love it. There's something magical about the gifts people have that make us come into this business. Um, this 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 aptitude where we can dream as far as we can dream, and as long as we have the ability to pick up a pencil and create something on a panel with a pencil in your brain, in your hand, and then write a story that goes with it. I mean, there's literally nothing you can't conceive of that doesn't equal, to me, anything that's ever been done by mankind. I mean, why would it be something with parameters behind it? To me, there is none. So you're there at 19, and you have to decide, and you start. I just started to draw. So I went to, and you go to the house eventually, and you have to have a real job, and you stay with a real job until eventually something breaks through. And for me, it was meeting Mike Barron. Mike Barron is the progenitor of this. He's the one that thought it all up. We got together because of conditions at the time where things, you have to be out there looking for things because otherwise you're not going to be found by the people that you're eventually going to run into, the conditions that are going to make up the rest of your life. I mean, Baron and I are still the best of friends. We happen to be working separately on different Nexus books, but that's because we think that's best that we do that difference, what we think the book should be like at this time. But for 25 years, we worked on stuff together, and it was a great partnership considering how different me and Baron are, which is a funny thing in itself, how people that think and act so differently and grew up so differently can come together and form this relationship of it's quite startling when you think about it. In kind of the weird way I tend to explain things, I was very ambitious, and I threw myself into the places where I was most likely to get noticed by the people that I would eventually get hooked up with. And Baron was the guy that I did meet, and it's just funny things happen when these things collide and and things go forth from there. It's almost like some kind of a cosmic boom. You meet somebody, and then, but you have to both be equally ambitious. if one of the partners is lazy, you got 4 or 5 guys, and not all of them are going to be equally excited about what they're doing. Someone's going to drop out, and there's 100 reasons why bands don't work out. I'm in touch with a guy that had a local band in Madison, Wisconsin, where I grew up, and one of the greatest bands I ever knew, but they never made it beyond local notoriety. I almost think that's good sometimes, because what happens to bands is just unbelievable. They think this is kind of like the Stan Lee thing. Once they get the dream that they claim to want, that's when all hell breaks loose. And they fight about everything, and then the drugs come in, and all the crazy crap that they fall prey to, and then one of them dies at 25 because of drugs and drinking and money, and it's just crazy. I can't help but imagine they're thinking back to the days when things were innocent and fun. They hadn't made it yet, but those early days, I don't think it could ever happen again the way it happened back then. Comics formed because of Baron, basically. I drew the pictures. We got together with some local guys that were distributing comics. And at that time, there was this weird thing going on where we had seen some guys out of Chicago put out a comic called Justice Machine. What is that all about? Well, it was guys that were nearby in Chicago that put out this magazine that was a comic book, and it had a cover by John Byrne. So when we saw that, and from that, little trees began to sprout, and one of them was, well, this is kind of neat. Can we do this? And the answer was yes. Why not? So very innocent times when you think going back, and very exciting times, and very promising. And then we formed this little company up at the Capitol in Madison, and we got an editor and a very small group of people, and there we were in our early 20s, a little older than that. And there we were, young kids. You know, again, the band thing, almost all the great material that's produced out of bands happens in their 20s. A phenomenon, right? It doesn't happen in their 40s and in their 50s. It happens in their 20s, or freaking 20s. Why is that? You know, what's the phenomenon that brings things together and produces this insane creative genius in their 20s? So there's this, I think about these things a lot when I'm at the board, these weird phenomenons that they fascinate me, the why of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm long-windedly trying to explain, trying to answer a question. It's just something in the air at the time that comes about because you put yourself in the right place, and then things happen from there.
So can you talk a little bit about what the current plans are with the character, in terms of a new series by yourself? I know you and Mike are doing separate things. So like, and the Ash Cans have been coming out, but when do you think we can expect like a new Nexus book by you?
Right. That was your second follow-up question. Thanks for reminding me. So decades go by. The time was, and we're older, and we won the award. We've gotten all these wonderful accolades from peers in the business, and suddenly you find yourself not in your 20s anymore, but in your 60s. So by that time, things have changed. So at that point, you tend to be either a burnout, or you're ready for the next surprise, the next hurrah. Now, Barrett and I, again, we're blessed. We're charging forward like a couple versions of ourselves when we were 20. We're so excited about what we're doing here. For the first time, I've been forced to learn how to write. Versus off me being, oh my God, what am I going to do? I've never done this before. To very slowly, going inside yourself and dredging up the things that leave you less afraid and more excited about trying something you've never done before. And I figured out a way to do that. And an entire book later, The Coming of Gormando, this huge 300-page book. And then the new one, The Battle for Thune World. These new volumes of Nexus that I'm writing, drawing, inking, lettering, all this kind of stuff are going to be, I believe, the future of my life until I have no more future. And it's incredibly exciting. And it feels wonderful inside to be going in a direction that feels really the right way to be going right now. Mm-hmm. And so you get a double hit of Nexus. You get Barron's version without my critical thinking with what he was doing before, because I was always criticizing what he was doing because I didn't think it was going in the right direction. But we're free from each other, or rather, he's free from me, so I can do my version of the way I think it should be done. And when you're in your 60s and you're not ready to evolve into a total person creatively, When are you going to be ready? Well, so for these new books are coming out of me and Baron. My books are huge hardcovers. If people haven't seen them, well, they just go to these new things called websites, which we didn't have that, and check it out. But we are incredibly proud of what we're doing with this stuff. It's to us, it's clearly a renaissance time of our lives where we feel like we're kind of blazing new trails in a much later part of our lives chronologically.
Yeah. I mean, I love the character, and I love seeing, like, to me, like I associate Nexus with you. So that's why I love getting new Nexus from you. I mean, I'm just huge fan of your art, and I'm super stoked to see the continuation of the story, with your vision going forward. Do you think that how have the Kickstarters really helped continue to fund the story moving on? Because you're releasing little pieces of it, right, with these ash cans. Like, how does that help keep you kind of going and producing the stuff?
Well, Rude Dude, as we call it, is actually more than just me. I'm just the guy that draws the damn pictures. I happen to marry this girl named Janelle Phillips, who really is, to no one's surprise, the brains behind the PR part of what I do. Mm-hmm. So this ash can stuff and the yearly sketchbooks, as they call them, where we compile stuff in a book of commissions and sketch that we put together to stay solvent. No one is getting paid to do these Nexus books. I'm not getting paid for them. The only way I'm able to keep doing them is because of fans. They call it crowdfunding, but it's nothing more than fans donating money so I can survive on that to keep going to do the books. So it's entirely due to the backing of fans that enables me that I want to base the rest of my life on doing.
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think that I love the format of Kickstarter. Like you said, it's not just crowdfunding, it is fans. And like when you have a loyal fan base, you can always kind of count on them to help get these going. And I think that, to me, it's like such a direct connection, besides maybe buying it directly from a creator's website, right? But like really feeling like you're a part of the creation of something, being able to help fund these projects in between like the main books. I love what Kickstarter has become. And I love your sketchbooks that you come out with every year too. That I'm a huge fan of those as well. Can you talk a little bit about the decision to start doing the sketchbooks through Kickstarter, and how does this one kind of differ from the previous years?
There is no difference from the previous years. That they're just the latest offering that I've done. Mm-hmm. I have this compulsion to draw, and that's been in me my whole life. Someone came over the other day and they brought up this thing about, well, aren't you afraid of a blank piece of paper? Well, I laughed that off. I mean, to me, a blank piece of paper is something to attack, not to be afraid of. It's like, give me that piece of paper. There has to be something put down in there. No, it's not. I practice all the time because I love doing it. Like I'm practicing watercolor right now. What do I have here? This isn't a new thing right here, but
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I've got this obsession going on with watercolor. Watercolor is so hard to figure out, but it's beautiful if you ever are of a mind to get about it and even master it halfway. It's this transparent watercolor, is this beautiful flowing, so beautiful. Well, what artist wouldn't want to learn how to do that? So I keep trying and failing and failing. I don't think this is any different from anyone else. The person you begin as is a little small kid, is very much intact in whatever age you happen to be. You can prove this to yourself by asking yourself this question, Ryan. And the people that are listening in, how much have you really changed? How much has your inner person really changed from the time you're a little kid till now? Because if there's a big change, I would be surprised. Your essence kind of stays the same. And the essence of me was somebody who was compulsively drawing for whatever reason that makes people compulsively want to do anything in life. So I love learning new things, and that produces commissions. The commissions are another thing that help finance, keep us afloat financially. The realities of life are very financial. I would be very happy if I actually have this kind of funny running joke with myself. I think if you reach the age of 60, you shouldn't have to make money anymore. I think the world should just pay you. You survived this long, you've done good things with your life. Now you pay me, I shouldn't have to pay. And then you're just allowed to, for the rest of your life, devote yourself entirely to furthering what you began all those years ago. But we know that's not going to happen. So keep trucking, Charlie.
So you talk about like watercolor, and obviously, pencil, paper, pen, paper, all that kind of stuff. What other mediums do you like to work in besides the stuff that maybe we would just see in a sketchbook?
Well, I think I mentioned I had people the other day. I've got a closet filled with hundreds of pieces of work. 80% of them are oil paintings, and they're not comic book related. They're studies of models that I love doing. All the kind of things that they train you to do in art school, and still lifes and things like that, and outdoor studies. That's if you really want to learn your craft. I'm afraid the answer is copy comic book. It's if you want to be a total artist, and to me, being an illustrator is a total artist because an illustrator has to know how to draw or paint anything under any lighting conditions there are, any subject matter. So if you can do that, you can do anything. So that's always been the goal of my life. So the way to learn that is to study light, study objects under light, any kind of light. And I think I talk about this a lot in like my kind of update into a second volume. I think it's one of the best books I've ever seen. Yeah, I happen to have been the author of it, but everything that I believe the other art books never even touch on. I've got a very askew way of looking at things that the standard status quo mind out there never seems to want to cover. But I do because I think in a different way. If I was going to teach somebody art, for example, the last thing I would do is start with squares and spheres and all that other kind of stuff. Nobody wants to come into an art class that's excited about drawing comic books, and you have them drawing cubes. They boring. So you start them off doing what they want to do, and eventually, if they get in trouble and they don't know where to go from there, you bring them backwards, and eventually you bring them so far backwards that you say, this human head, you can actually draw a sphere or you can draw a cube and it can fit into there, and it's dimensional and there's planes. So that's how you hook these guys when it comes to teaching them the fundamentals. But don't teach until they get into trouble and they don't know how to solve something that they're so enthused over. They can't figure out how to draw this head or this arm or this body. And then you tell them eventually, look, it all comes down to basic shapes right here. Unless you're a genius like Jack Kirby, who defied every rule there was. He was an Einsteinian, like most of us build up our forms in the same way that through basic forms and shapes. And that's how we learn to eventually invent all these things out of our head, all these positions of people in our comic book. They're flying, they're punching, they're sitting, whatever they happen to be doing. We invent these things out of our head from studying fundamentals so much. And through the memorization process that we have the gift of doing, we humans, there's no telling how far you can go with that. So being an artist is it's not only a compulsion, but I think it's the greatest calling you can ever have. It not only satisfies yourself, but look at the joy it brings to thousands, if not millions of people throughout the world. And that's another reason people want to increase their readership. If you guys like what I do, for example, on Nexus or the sketchbooks that I put out, imagine if 100,000 more find it something that brings a little joy to their lives. Well, how good is that? There's what a wonderful thing to be doing in your life.
I totally agree. Like besides your own creation with Nexus and your sketchbook, you have done cover work, for Marvel and DC. Recently, I know the most recent one I could think of was the Danger Street one you did with Atlas, that has come out, the Action Comics 1050. I think you did a cover for that as well. So is there any desire besides working on your own stuff to ever do interiors again? I know you have in the past, but is that something you've thought about wanting to do, or are you content with just doing the cover work for the big companies and then working on interiors for yourself?
That's a great question. The question of interiors kind of goes to the root of all the censoring that goes on of the things I like to do, the little things I like to put in. I mean, going back to the world's finest days, back in '88 and '89, I couldn't put anything in the backgrounds without getting censored. Now, I think this is a crock of nonsense. And somehow the thinking of these people, rather than being excited about advertising a little Coke can in the back, and like Coke would object to that. Give me a break, right?
Yeah.
Or drawing of Elvis that I did in some of the recent books. Instead of that being a plus, they look at that as a negative. Now, that negative comes from a certain kind of mindset. Well, that mindset to me is corrupt. And it's taken hold of the business, and I think it's a bunch of garbage. So the fact that they were always going to censor me. I grew up in the 70s, the 60s and the 70s, and a hero of actors in his all the time. Well, geez, it was fine back then, but it's suddenly not okay now. Where does that nonsense come from? It comes from a person who suddenly decides that this is not okay to do anymore. So it just makes comics far less fun to do, because there's a turkey up there that decides that for everyone, and free advertising for the things you happen to throw in there, or flattering to the actor you happen to be using the likeness of, it's a negative. But that's a mindset, and it comes from somebody on top who thinks in a very negative way. So I don't want that kind of nonsense in my life. I don't have time for that crap. So when I do Nexus, I'm liberated. I'm liberated from Nexus the Liberator in more ways than one. So I just have the hardest time having to deal with the censorship, mostly Marvel or DC. The other companies probably don't care, but I don't do interiors for them because it's not high profile enough. It has to be high profile because I'm not in the amount of people that I need my work to reach. Now I'll do cover like that if I think they're doing the right kind of thing with their fledgling company, can boost them somehow with the work that I do. I have no trouble doing work like that. That's kind of like the Red Cross, helping people that might be able to benefit from my abilities. But when it comes to the changes that have been attacked from the 80s on, where the censorship nonsense is going on, and the craziness of lawyers deciding what is and what is criminal to me. Wow.
Yeah, I totally agree on that.
Yeah.
So besides your cover work, your Kickstarters that you're working on, is there any other projects that you're currently working on that you can talk about?
There is one thing, Ryan. There's a little thing called a cartoon show that I've been working on for 35, going on 40 years. And I think about this thing all the time, philosophically mostly. Boy, I talk about this a lot. I think about it a lot. I've back in here's the genesis of the Nexus TV show. When I moved to LA from the freezing climates of Wisconsin to the warm climates of LA, as soon as I moved there, I had a lot of friends in the animation business. And I very quickly conceived this idea because I have no brackets in my head or parameters about what I can't do. And I advise everyone in comics to think like that, or anyone who's got a creative position in life. So I gathered a bunch of people together. Actually, they found out that I was doing this on my own. They threw to my pad in Pasadena. And we all sat around in the middle of the living room, painting cells and drawing layouts and all this kind of stuff, and trying to figure out what we were just a bunch of guys hanging out trying to figure out how to do this stuff. We made all these mistakes, and that's part of what it's all about, the adventure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, through the years that have gone by, I figured out a lot of it. But the dream of doing this cartoon show has never wavered. I eventually succeeded in doing 3 minutes of what they call pilot animation. It's been on YouTube for, I don't know, 13 years now. It's got like 3,000 hits or whatever it is. And I have not had a single serious offer from anyone out there that wants to do this show as badly as I do. So that question floats around in my mind more than a few times in the last 40 years. How is this show going to work if it is going to work? Well, it's not going to work with working with Disney Plus. And the people at Dark Horse erroneously attempted to go to places like that, these corporations. Even worse, they have gone off the tracks and tried to sell something that is not in my vision, which is straight out Johnny Quest version of Nexus in the 21st century. They've taken it in a different direction, which I totally disapprove of. But things happen, and the lesson from that is never let anyone take charge of the vision you know that has to be the way it is. Well, who am I? I'm not an expert. Someone else always knows better than me. Well, what if they don't know better than you? Well, that's you, ultimate decision maker of your life and your creative property. That's what I'm doing with the comic book now. I don't need anyone to tell me what to do with it. I know. And after all this time and working in the business, I know better than anyone how it's going to be done. That's why, getting back to the Nexus cartoon show, I did this 3 minutes of pilot animation. I know exactly what it has to be. I know exactly what it sounds like in my head. I know exactly about everything that has to be done to put it together the way I want it. That's part of it's not just about another stupid cartoon show. And I made it over in Brazil or Turkey or the Cayman Islands. It's about reviving something that was very inspiring to my youth that I want to revive again. Mm-hmm. That's the biggest reason for doing it. But I can't do it alone, nor do I want to do it alone. I have to find somebody, and the way I figured out the only way this is going to work is to remember the corporations are out. I want nothing to do with these people because nothing but disaster is going to come from that. No, the way this has to work is I have to find a fan. I have to find a fan that has $1 million, because it's actually the cost of a single episode, Ryan, is $1 million the way it is right now.
Oh, wow.
For producing a single, he has to have incredibly deep pockets. And he has to want this as badly as I do, except he's the money person, I'm the creative person. We have to, and then from there, we have to assemble the things that are necessary to make the show. Well, that sounds like the story of Stone Soup, doesn't it? Who's going to help me eat the soup? Who's going to help me make the seeds to make this to make the soup? A lot of analogies going on there. So unless I find that person, there's things that are going to happen. But it's been 35 years now, and I had nobody that ever really offered. So That's the situation as it exists right now. Is it going to happen? Am I going to find that person? Or is all the work I've done, which literally stacks of paper, they go up here, scripts, layouts, storyboards, everything. Um, is that just going to sit here someday and rot away in my closet? It's finally going to come along, this rarest of people, and give me a thumbs up and say, let's do it. And not back out. Don't change your mind at the last minute. Don't chicken out. And go forward with it. And actually, one day we will turn on our TVs like we used to, and there'll be some streaming channel, and on comes Nexus, the animated series. So a lot of unknowns that exist in the lives of you and I and everyone else right now, as to what's going to happen. But as I wrote a friend recently, Ryan, funny thing about unknowns, in time, have to become known. So they can't stay unknown forever. That's the nature of the unknowns. So stay tuned.
Well, I think that is an awesome part to stop at. I think that I just love everything you do. I'm a huge fan. I can't wait to get this new sketchbook, and I can't wait to see what the next Kickstarter is, the next Nexus book. And I hope that person with the deep pockets is listening, so you could get that Nexus animated show, because I want that too. Steve, I just want to thank you so much. I appreciate you and you taking time out to talk with me and everything you do. And for everybody listening and watching, I was wondering if you could share where everybody can find you online, all your social media stuff, where they can purchase some stuff from you, commissions, all that. I'm going to drop all the links down below for you.
That'd be great. Again, the second half of the Rude Dude brigade is all Janelle, and she puts together the website. She puts together all these things where you can order these things from. That's the world of today. You order this stuff, you help keep the Rude Dude team, simple as it is, solvent, so I can continue to do the work that I'm driven to do by passion for the duration of my life. So thank you for inviting me, Ryan. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, of course. I'd love to have you back on again sometime in the future. This was a blast.
Well, as soon as those unknowns becomes known, we'll get back in touch.
All right. Sounds good. Well, take care. We'll talk soon.
Thank you, Ryan. Bye-bye.